following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Welcome to the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network and a program called Claire's Corner. My name's Claire Hall. I'm your host, and I get to talk to all kinds of neat people about all kinds of neat subjects, but you find my program coming back again and again to baseball, books, and movies, and today, in a way, we are touching on all three. I am very happy to welcome to the program a key member of the cast and really one of my favorite, and I think a lot of people's favorite movies of all times, Dwier Brown from Field of Dreams, better known to us as John Kinsella. How are you today?
I'm very good, Claire. Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about, I think through 30 years, this is a movie that has really burrowed itself deep into the consciousness of a lot of people. But if somehow somebody isn't familiar with it, how would you give the, elevator speech version of this wonderful story?
Well, Field of Dreams is based on a novella by Bill Kinsella called Shoeless Joe, and it's sort of the plot of which is an Iowa farmer hears voices telling him, if you build it, he will come, and he figures out that what he's being asked to do is build a baseball field in the middle of his cornfield so that Shoeless Joe Jackson can come back from the dead to play baseball there. As many of your fans know, Shoeless Joe was a player involved in the 1919 World Series, where the Chicago White Sox were accused of taking money from gamblers and throwing the World Series, and 8 players, including Shoeless Joe, were banned forever from baseball. And so this is a little homage to Shoeless Joe and to farm life. And anyway, Ray does build the field. Shoeless Joe does come back and sends him on many other adventures, which bring about a kind of a beautiful ending to this great story.
A beautiful scene of reconciliation where you play Ray's estranged father and one-time minor league baseball player, John Kinsella. It's maybe 5 minutes of screen time. Is that correct? But
yeah,
beautiful.
I think maybe.
Yeah. So talk about how you came to earn this role. You had some acting credits beforehand, but coming into the project, how much you knew about the original story, and maybe your first impressions of the script and anything else that's relevant. Oh, by the way, before I ask you to proceed with the answer, I ought to let people know that 5 years ago, you wrote a wonderful, wonderful book about your whole experience with Field of Dreams. It's called If You Build It, and I understand it is available on Amazon and also from your website, and that website is?
www.dwierbrown.com. My name is spelled Dwier, brown like the color, and But as far as the movie goes, for me it was just another audition. Coming down the pike, I was a young actor. I'd been I grew up on a farm in Ohio, and moved to Chicago to start my acting career, and did some plays and a few TV shows there, and then came to LA, and I got in the Thornbirds, which was a very big mini-series of the time. And I'd been working for about 6 years when Shoeless Joe came down the pike. And I had read this wonderful novella in college and just loved it. So, of course, I was very excited to audition for it. I just kind of went through the process. There's probably, 200 or 300 other guys who auditioned for the role of John Kinsella, including, according to the sign-in sheet, Jim Carrey auditioned to play John Kinsella, and it's the only time I've ever beat him out for a role. But this was before he was a big star, and anyway, I'm grateful to have won one role from him. But I don't know. It was just very interesting to me that I grew up on a farm in Ohio, and my dream was to become an actor, and I had to leave the farm to go to Chicago and then LA, and then the role that people remember me for is a role that I had to go back to a farm in Iowa to shoot. So it sort of came full circle for me.
That's interesting. I was just talking with a friend the other day. I've just turned 60 and he's a couple of years older, and he said, we're kind of at the age in life where we realize it's not a straight line journey. It's really more of a circle. So
yeah, that's so true.
I think, that scene at the end of the movie where Kevin Constner as Ray Kinsella realizes that you're his father, the backup catcher or the catcher in the old Yankee uniform who had been catching the game they were watching, and just everything about that. I can watch it again and again, and it just still moves me so deeply. I mean, the greeting and just the little touches. I think something that you recently shared on Facebook was that when he said, "Hey, Dad, want to have a catch?" that the dad wasn't originally in the script. That must
that's
have been
right. They added that in post because of there was some confusion when they had test screenings of the movie. It had already been, essentially completed, and Universal ran some test screenings, and a lot of the audience members, although they loved the movie, thought it was kind of cruel of Ray that he wouldn't say to his dad, you're my father, and here's this chance for us to get back together. And I think when we were shooting it, both Kevin and I and the director Phil sort of felt like that was kind of went without saying, that we were kind of playing this tenuous little relationship. And my preparation as an actor, I sort of felt like there's some very interesting boundaries to that baseball field. Early in the movie, Shoeless, Amy Madigan asks Shoeless Joe to come in and have coffee, and he says, "I don't think I can." And of course, the pivotal scene when Archie Graham runs to the baseline, and as soon as he steps over it, he becomes Doc Graham so that he can save Karen. So anyway, I was sort of playing as an actor that there's these rules, and that if maybe I say son, or he calls me father, that maybe the field would disappear and this magical experience that we've got to have would disappear. And so that's sort of how we were playing it, I think, as actors. And I think it added to the kind of tenuous, delicate nature of that scene. But in these screenings, so many people were upset that Ray hadn't told his dad that he's his son, and that they added in the word dad. We shot it. It was just, "Hey, you want to have a catch?" Wow. And if you'll notice when you're watching the last scene, you see Kevin say, "Hey," and then they cut immediately to my reaction when he says the word dad. And of course, the reason they had to do that is his mouth wasn't making the words dad at the time, so they had to cover it by cutting to me in that moment. And I don't mind at all. I'm glad we got to shoot it the way we did, and I'm certainly glad that people didn't end up leaving the movie upset that Ray hadn't fessed up to his dad in that final moment.
No, but this is really fascinating for me as a longtime fan of the film, and what you've said just kind of confirms in my mind. Like, for instance, the moment where he's introducing you to Karen, and he starts to say something like, "This is my," and you give him what I would say kind of a knowing look, like, a friendly look, but definitely the body language, the expression I got was like, better not go there, otherwise the magic might disappear. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, totally. That was, to me, the moment that kind of was the tell on that relationship. But it was subtle, and if people didn't get it, it was not worth having them leave the theater, outraged. So I really didn't mind, but I love to think that the performance, I mean, it's one of the magics of film. You can change so many things through editing, but I'm a theater guy, so I want my performance to tell the whole story, as you sort of have to do frequently on stage, and so but it's no sweat. There's so many wonderful things that they did to take that great book and make it into an even better movie, I think, and that kind of made that movie. Obviously, we're still talking about it 30 years later, so I think they made some very good choices. And I credit Phil Robinson with the majority of those great choices he made, and also James Horner's magical musical score, I think really gave that end particularly gave it much more weight and power. And so I thank him for that. Rest his soul.
Agreed. And I read the novella when it first came out as well. I was so thrilled when I heard it was going to be made into a film, and really fearful that sometimes screen adaptations don't live up to your expectations of from the book. But this was one that, for all the reasons that you have cited, for me, truly, exceeded my fondest dreams. There was real magic up there on that screen, and there still is. And so let me ask you maybe to, again, maybe move into the next phase as the film came out and the reaction of people and how deeply they've been touched and how, that this has just continued unabated for 3 decades.
Yeah, I'm as surprised as anyone else. It certainly has changed my life. I mean, for the first 25 years of the movie, even when people would come up to me in airports and grocery stores and recognize me somehow, was just strange. I've been in much larger roles in other more popular movies, but I think because of the emotional nature of that final scene, my face is deeply, indelibly tattooed on people's optic nerves, or certainly their emotions. And so they'll come up to me and tell me stories, just amazing stories of how that movie changed their relationship with their dad, how they, hadn't spoken in 10 years and they reconciled, or that they changed careers because of that movie, because If You Build It, or and because they recognize me, and because they because the movie's been such a part of their lives, they want to give me something back. So they tell me their stories. And I was always just, on my heels when I would be walking through a grocery store and somebody would start, we end up, looking at each other and crying and hugging each other. And this is a complete stranger. So for 25 years, though, I was a little embarrassed about people doing that with me because my part was so small. And I thought, oh my gosh, I hope this is happening to Kevin and James Earl and Ray Liotta. I hope people are stopping them and telling them how powerful this meaning, this movie has been with them. And I realized I was waiting for those 25 years for Kevin to write a book or James Earl to write a book about these amazing, encounters that I was sure they must be having as well. But what I realized was when I decided to go ahead and write the book for try to get it done for the 25th anniversary, I realized, oh my gosh, if you ran into James Earl Jones, you might ask him, what does Darth Vader eat for breakfast? Or, you'd have a dozen other movies to talk to him about. Obviously the same with Kevin or Ray Liotta, but, although I've been in, 70 or 80 other films and TV shows, this is the one people remember me from. So it made sense to me. And because it's my face they see once Ray and Kevin and Amy Madigan and all those guys have opened everybody's hearts, I take off my catcher's mask there at the pivotal part of the movie, and it's my face that you look at for, 15 or 20 seconds while I'm walking from home plate to introduce myself to my son. And I think it's because of that, all those reasons, that I'm the one whose face they want to tell their stories to. And so I ended up writing the book starting with that, with these amazing encounters, which there's probably, 8 or 10 of them out of the hundreds that have happened to me in the book, because so many of them are so similar, just how it changed their relationships or changed their outlook on life, or, so anyway, when I put the book together, I started with that. And then of course I had amazing amount of fun stories to talk about the shoot itself. Here I was back on a farm, which I'd grown up on. So I was perfectly comfortable on this 200-acre farm in the middle of nowhere because, but for the name of the state, it's the same place I grew up, and we had such fun on the set, and it was really a fantastic cast. And there were a lot of difficulties with the shoot. The main one being that the corn wouldn't grow because there was a drought that year. So they ended up shooting every other scene in the movie while they got special permission to water the corn because, farmers don't do that in Iowa. They just wait till the rain finally comes. But in this case, they had a movie to shoot, and how stupid it would have looked for shoeless Joe to walk out of knee-high corn. So anyway, they'd take an insurance policy with Lloyd's of London for $3 million on the corn, because obviously if it didn't grow, it would have ruined the movie. They got the permission to dam up the little creek that flows through that farm and water the corn. And they also had on order 70,000 stalks of silk corn from Hong Kong that they were going to fly in if they needed to and shove in the ground and try to make it look like it was a cornfield. But, fortunately, the corn did grow in that heat with the added water on there. By the time they had shot all the other scenes that they could possibly shoot, the corn was in fact too tall. When Kevin was walking through it, he's 6'1", but the corn was like 7 and 8 feet tall, and you couldn't even see him. So they had to build a little platform between the rows of corn so that Kevin could walk on the platform and still be above this corn, so that you could see that here's the star of your movie that's buried in corn. But anyway, it was just that kind of thing where just what feast or famine things went wrong on that movie, and you would never know it to watch the final product because it just ended up being such a beautiful movie. But in fact, it was a nightmare of a shoot. And of course, they rarely trouble the actors with such things. They couldn't just postpone the shoot because James Earl had a job and following that, and Kevin was supposed to go shoot Revenge down in Mexico, and Burt Lancaster left to work on a movie in Italy, and so they had to finish it, on time. And it was just headaches that, fortunately don't reflect on the final product of the movie. But it really was quite a shoot in Iowa in the summer of '88.
Let's talk about the fact that a little bit that that unlike so many movie sets which just disappear once the shooting is done, is that the field has been preserved and has really become a shrine with ghost players, people visiting from all over the country, and I'm sure all over the world. You've been back many times, and just your reflections on really how it's become to some people almost a sacred spot.
Yeah, it really is a neat place. I've been there maybe 30 times over the years, and I was just there twice this year, and every time I go, it's just a magical place. I think partially because so many people, millions of people have been there, and frequently they bring certainly memories of their fathers and sons, but they bring baseball mitts and bats and balls, and they play there, and they leave their memories there. And I think it's a very hallowed space. But yeah, who would have thought? I don't know if your audience knows, but the field itself was built. It ended up being on two different farmers' properties. Left and center field was on the Ames Camp's property next door, and Don Lansing owned the house and the farm that the majority of the infield and bleachers and all that stuff is built on. Well, after the film was over, Ames Camps just plowed their field back into corn. So that first year, Don Lansing was so enamored with having all these movie stars on his property the previous summer, he thought, I'm just going to leave that field there. I don't know. I just feel like, so he ended up, it was one of those life imitates art things where he left it up, and sure enough, within a month of the movie coming out, the first guy arrived there at the field. He was driving across country from New York to San Francisco, and he stopped and Don saw him standing in the middle of his baseball field one morning and was like, oh my gosh. And he went down there, and this guy was, oh gosh, I'm sorry if I trespassed, but my dad loved baseball. And he insisted on leaving with Don Lansing his San Francisco baseball cap that his father had given him, and drove off on the rest of his trip, and this is back in the days before GPS. This field, I'm telling you, this farm is in the middle of nowhere. It was on dirt roads. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, but this place was way out there, and the fact that he could even find it was a miracle. But he was just the first in many, many thousands of people who would come, and they'd always, they'd want to leave stuff. Don Lansing had a job at John Deere tractor factory, so he was gone most weekdays. he'd come home and there'd be, you know, a $20 bill with a rock sitting on top of it so it didn't blow away, or a $100 bill, or, you know, people saying,
wow.
please keep up this field, and what a magical place. And then, you know, sure enough, by the next year, Al Amescamp decided, well, okay, I'll put it back in grass, and then the field became whole again. And you know, I mean, there was, I don't know if there's also a long history of those two kind of feuding and having their separate souvenir stands and not letting baseball games go from one farm to the other. You know, it was very different than the movie is left at the end, where everybody's like, people will give you $20 and we'll save the farm and all this stuff. It ended up being, you know, something of a little feud between the two, but nonetheless, it has stood the test of time and is still one of the top tourist attractions in the state of Iowa, even 30 years later. It's amazing.
Wow. Any thoughts on the news that Major League Baseball is going to be putting up a stadium nearby? And my understanding is next summer the White Sox and Yankees will be actually playing a regulation game there, and that at first, I remember the first news coverage saying it was going to be a temporary stadium, but now that it's going to be permanent. And just from the coverage I'm reading, it seems like some people are excited about there being another drawing card there, and others worried that it'll kind of spoil the magic.
Yeah, I guess I've had all those thoughts. I mean, I think it's a wonderful idea for MLB because I think it's just what baseball needs. I think we all need to be reminded, with the many distractions we have in the world, that the place that baseball has had in this country for centuries. And, you know, I think it's very smart of them to do this. I'm concerned too about, you know, the proximity of the other field, if it's going to spoil some of the magic. And in fact, the last time I was there in September, the day after we had our big field or Team of Dreams event there with a bunch of Hall of Famers, and the next day I went out to the field because there was thousands of people there that day, and I wanted to see it kind of in a more private setting. They were already leveling the field and combining the corn down so that they could, I think they're going to get the drainage together before the winter weather hits, and then, you know, start in next spring with building up so I've always felt that about the movie. There's been many plans for that property, and I just always hope that they would build whatever structures far enough away that the field itself can have its own wonderful little life without feeling like it's part of a, you know, amusement park or something like that. I think that's one of the wonderful things about that is Don Lansing never charged a penny for anybody to go there. You just drive down the driveway. You can spend all day there. You can do whatever we want. There's a souvenir stands, and even the prices in the souvenir stands, I think, are very reasonable. And you know, I mean, there's nothing to do there other than, you know, play baseball or walk around the field or go into the corn or whatever, but it's free. You know, I mean, where do you get that in the world these days where, you know, certainly, you know, Universal or somebody could have turned it into, you know, Field of Dreams World or some other thing, but they've really let it kind of keep its magic feeling. And I hope that whatever MLB does, that they do it, you know, beautifully and tactfully, and you know, kind of not ruin, not to spoil what's become a, you know, a national treasure, really.
Oh, a very good way to describe it. Well, we're running out of our half hour, but as I expected, it just has gone sailing by. Actor Dwier Brown, best known as John Kinsella in Field of Dreams, but many dozen more acting credits, author of a wonderful book about the making of the movie and also its remarkable afterlife called If You Build It. And again, tell people how to find your website, because not only can you get a signed copy of the book, you've got some other nifty photos. I think the movie script available, all signed by you.
Yeah, that's on my website at dwierbrown.com, DWIER Brown.com. And also my book's available on Amazon as well. If you don't want a signed copy, it's you know, you get it for the same price there and probably get it faster. But anyway, yeah, it's got a lot of nice reviews, so check it out. And you know, I'm proud of it, and I think it really does give a lot of different aspects to the greater impact that Field of Dreams has had, and certainly some of the fun that we had while we were shooting it. So Yeah.
So, can I close by putting a question to you that Doc Brown put to Ray in the movie? Is there magic out there in the moonlight?
Oh, yeah. Heaven's a place where dreams come true, and they've certainly come true for me in that wonderful field.
Thank you very much. Dwier Brown, my guest on this edition of Claire's Corner. We'll talk to you next time.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices, and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.